You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 26th of July 2013. Bank of England's Taliban attack. Finally, PM admits immigration is a constant drain on public services. Licence plate scanning cameras ruled illegal in Britain. Campania Governor warns of violence due to joblessness. France continues war on far right. Nick Griffin, MEP from the Welsh Valleys. Pregnant women in public, immoral and unpleasant. Army conducts nighttime exercises in downtown Chicago. Reprehensible UNESCO adds works of Che Guevara to World Register. Thought for the day, what happens in the US happens here. And finally, the unkindest cut of all. UK news. Bank of England's Taliban attack. Furious, Vince Cable has accused the Bank of England of behaving like the Taliban in imposing strict lending rules which have held back the economy. The business secretary said tough restrictions imposed on banks to build up stockpiles of money was choking off lending to small firms. In a further escalation of the row between the government and the Bank of England, a Treasury source slammed the jihadist tendency in Threadneedle Street towards the banks. Finally, Prime Minister admits immigration is a constant drain on public services. Immigration is a constant drain on public services in Britain, David Cameron conceded yesterday. The Prime Minister said Britain had suffered a frightening decade of completely lax border policies which had placed huge strains on communities. And he hinted at further measures to cut the number of people arriving in the UK. His comments came after the Office for Budget Responsibility warned Britain would need millions more immigrants in the coming decades to offset the effects of an ageing population. But Mr Cameron made clear yesterday that he wants to accelerate progress towards meeting his pledge to slash annual net migration, the number by which the population grows after both immigration and emigration have been counted, to the tens of thousands. Licence plate scanning cameras ruled illegal in Britain. Police could be forced drastically to scale back their use of Big Brother road cameras which record the movements of millions of motorists every day. In a landmark ruling, the privacy watchdog declared that a ring of cameras installed around the quiet market town of Royston in Hertfordshire was unlawful and excessive. Privacy campaigners said yesterday's ruling would affect every police force in the country and would make them carry out a full audit of the automatic number plate recognition ANPR system, a network of 10,000 cameras across the UK. Every day these record the detailed movements of some 16 million motorists. The cameras record the number plate of every vehicle that passes. World at 8 states. Sounds good, but what will happen to the thousands of unlicensed and untaxed vehicles driven on our roads? Why don't they use this system to prosecute these people? It also means more work for the police, in fact keeping them in offices instead of on the streets. European news. Campania Governor warns of violence due to joblessness. Social unrest and even rioting over the economic crisis and joblessness in Italy would likely begin in the poverty-stricken south, including Naples, Campania Regional Governor Stefano Caldoro said Tuesday. Riots and revolts will begin here in Naples and Campania, said Caldoro, adding that he was making a political judgment. He was reacting to comments by Casaleggio published during the weekend on the blog of M5S leader Beppe Grillo. Casaleggio said that a coming economic shock to Italy would likely lead to unrest and violence and called for significant change to the country's leadership. Caldoro's comments came the same day that the Association of Italian Chambers of Commerce, Union Camerieri and the Labour Ministry warned that Italy will suffer a net loss of 250,000 private sector jobs this year. France continues war on far right. France banned two extreme right-wing groups on Wednesday who were active and sometimes violent during anti-gay marriage protests and have been accused of glorifying the country's wartime collaboration with the Nazis. The dissolution of Nationalist Youth and the Heure Française comes 2 weeks after the government disbanded 3 other similar groups implicated in the death last month of a left-wing student in a Paris street brawl. Interior Minister Manuel Valls on Wednesday described the Heure Française founded in 1968 as an association that propagates a xenophobic and anti-Semitic ideology, racist and revisionist theories, which glorifies collaboration and the Vichy regime. Val said Nationalist Youth, the other organisation to have been banned, propagates hate and violence, glorifies collaboration, pays tribute to militiamen or to the Waffen-SS, the armed wing of the Nazi Party, with some of its members doing Hitler salutes. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, who is talking today about the economy and the Golden Dawn food banks.
Well, it's Friday, and time for another talk from me from the belly of the beast, except of course that the belly of the beast in Brussels is shut. So I'm not there, I'm in mid-Wales, which is a far nicer place to be. You probably have been looking at the news, and if you managed to catch something which isn't about the royal baby, you might have seen talk of the economic recovery going on in Britain. It's not, you know. What's going on here is that the government and the Bank of England have poured billions of pounds, billions and billions, in quantitative easing money. It's nearly all gone to the banks and the big players in the stock exchange, but there's been a little bit of a temporary trickle down. But it won't last, it can't last, they can't keep on printing such vast amounts of money without destroying the currency, so it's all going to come to a shuddering halt. Britain faces and has a gigantic and rising debt, and it's not getting any better. It's getting worse at a literally terrifying rate. So don't be fooled. Cameron and Osborne, they haven't sorted it out. They've just been borrowing some more money, piling debts on our heads, our children's heads, their children's heads, giving it to people who don't deserve it instead of investing it in real industry to make Britain a real economic power in the world again. They're in a mess they can't get out of. Added to the problems in Britain, of course, is the fact that there's still the ongoing slow-motion crash within the European Union. The International Monetary Fund is the latest to jump into this, which is pointing out that the fiscal tightening going on in the United States means that the weakest countries in Europe now face what they call a debt deflation spiral. Basically, that's an economic debt spiral, and Europe is in big trouble. The European Central Bank latest figures show that loans to the private sector, that's the sector that usually actually creates worthwhile wealth and worthwhile jobs, loans to the private sector contracted by a staggering 46 billion euros in June alone. They fell 33 billion euros in May, 28 billion euros in April, so the annual rate of contraction is actually accelerating. That's why the IMF say that there's a huge risk of stagnation, especially in the Mediterranean countries and in Ireland, and say that they're saying that things can get very much worse, really very much quicker. In fact, the IMF is now saying the only way that the Eurozone can get out of the mess is to have what it calls a proper banking union, and a huge fund whereby basically the Germans, the Dutch and the Brits pay out to keep other people's economies going when our own is in a mess as well. So that's it. The IMF is saying that Europe is stuffed unless it has complete banking union, and far more swathes of national sovereignty are ceded to the European Central Bank and European financial institutions. So either we surrender what's left of our sovereignty or the whole thing collapses. Well, we know where we want to go, but I think it's safe to say that Cameron and the rest will do whatever they have to do to try and keep the thing together. Probably can't be done. Moving on, but still connected with that, of course, one of the countries which has been most badly hit by the European disaster is Greece. There's a website, if you don't see it, you really should look at the website called Golden Dawn International Newsroom. Obviously, it's about and by the Greek nationalists, and it does a tremendous job in exposing many of the terrible lies told about Greek nationalism by the mass media, the controlled media, both in Greece and in the rest of Europe, including in Britain. It's a site really worth seeing. Give it a look every couple of days. Fascinating story at present is about how the chief of police banned all gatherings in Attica Square, which is in a part of Athens where Golden Dawn have their headquarters. They banned all gatherings there on a day when Golden Dawn were talking about running a soup kitchen. Can you imagine that? The chief of police stepping in to ban everything to stop a soup kitchen. Well, he failed to stop the soup kitchen, and there's wonderful pictures there of 10,000 Greeks turning up to get help, terribly in a way that they need to. The proud people with an ancient tradition, but there we are, 10,000 of them queuing up outside the nationalist headquarters to receive food aid, including 3 tons sent by Golden Dawn members in the United States, actually from New York, as well as help from as far afield as Australia. They really are showing the way to do things, and the fascinating thing about this is that Golden Dawn's food aid programme, about a year ago, they were very pleased to say they'd handed out about 1,000 parcels in total. So you're talking about an enormous growth of something, and I reiterate again, we need to be doing this in Britain. I've got funds available from my English Fair Fund, my Good Causes Fund, to help local units of the British National Party that seriously get into doing ward food aid operations. We need to do it. That's how we need to sink our roots in our local communities, so that the smears wash off us, so that the attacks wash off us, so we're loved by people at grassroots level. That's what we need to do. We need to start doing it now, because as the financial crisis comes back and bites deeper, more and more sections of the welfare state safety net are going to be shredded, destroyed or privatised, and we have to start filling those gaps. That's the source of the future national revolution in Britain. Not sitting around talking, not whining about the problem in pubs, not blaming people left, right and centre, actually getting on and doing positive things on the streets with our people. Let's get out there and do it. One last thing, talking about the mass media and the controlled mass media, there's one channel that stands head and shoulders, in fact, far, far higher than that, above all the rest. If you want to see the truth, you know perfectly well you don't use the BBC, you don't use Sky, you can't use Fox News. There's only one English language TV station which tells the truth repeatedly, openly and with stunning effect, and that's RT, Russia Today. Many of you are, I'm sure, already viewers of RT. If you already are, please do everything you can to spread the good tidings that there actually is a serious TV station out there that tells the truth. Tell everybody about it. Let's build the circulation for them. Do what we can to help. And if you haven't looked, go online at rt.com and take a look. The stories today, for instance, one saying that Greece is reaching the point of no return. That ties in obviously to the Golden Dawn story I was talking about a couple of minutes ago. Another very important story, covered up basically in the British media, that Halliburton have been fined £200,000 for destroying evidence in the 2010 Gulf oil spill. Now, what's that got to do with us, you might think? I'll tell you what. Because if you've got fracking planned in your area, which is the whole of Yorkshire, vast swathes of Lancashire, Cheshire, Staffordshire, huge swathes of the south coast of England, parts of South Wales as well, parts of Scotland, increasingly all over Britain, if you've got fracking coming your way, then you must know that the technology used in fracking is all of it patented by and owned by Halliburton. So the people who say that this system is going to be safe in Britain, they're exactly the same people as just been fined a huge sum of money for destroying evidence about another ecological disaster, the Gulf oil spill in 2010. Do you really want to believe them? But if you don't want to believe them, you need to go on RT to find out what the truth really is. Another story I noticed today, it's far smaller but very important. Scientists confirm pesticides kill honeybees. You're not going to get that from the controlled media in Britain as a rule, because in the end they're all part of the same corporate operations as are making money from killing our honeybees. So whether it's the big things, whether it's talking about the disaster of American and British foreign policy in the Middle East, in Syria, the new destabilisation of Iraq, whether it's the big things like that, or the small things like bees, RT, Russia Today, tells the truth. So watch it, learn, and spread the word, because knowledge is power.
Thank you, Nick, and I endorse the very excellent Russian TV as well. But in fact, World Today did the pesticides and honeybees last week in Thought for the Day, as ITV had done a report 24 hours before. So more people need to listen to us as well for interesting and unpublished news. World news. Pregnant women in public, immoral and unpleasant. Islamic thinker Omar Tugrul, in answer, in a TV programme, exhorted pregnant women not to show themselves in public, sparking protests from secular Turks and the opposition politicians, Hurriyet Online reported. It's against our civilisation to use fanfare to announce a pregnancy. Pregnant women should also not go around in public with those bellies. It's not aesthetic, in answer said on public TRT1 TV channel. After 7 or 8 months, future mothers should only leave the house by car with their husbands to get some fresh air, and only in the evening. Instead we see them all over television. It's unpleasant. This is not realism, it's immorality. The programme presenter thanked him with a "May God listen to you." In answer says it's unpleasant to see pregnant women on the street, but isn't it unpleasant hearing the Premier say women must have at least 3 children? Protested secular nationalist Mehmet Ökay, accusing TRT of having become a mere mouthpiece of the Islamic government. Islamist Premier Recep Tayyip Erdogan has more than once called on Turkish women to have at least 3 children in the name of national growth, berating abortion and caesarean sections. World Date says, although I think this is harsh, I personally don't like the fashion of wearing tight t-shirts when you have a huge bump. I did prefer it in the 60s and 80s when you swept around in flowing dresses or tops with trousers. Getting pregnant isn't difficult or clever, it's just nature and needn't be thrust down the public's neck so much. And until Turkey is in the EU, I'm refusing to put Turkey in the European news. Just call it my little rebellion. Turkey is only in the European landmass by sheer accident. They will never be European in my eyes. Army conducts nighttime exercises in downtown Chicago. Following up on recent and unannounced training exercises in Florida and Washington state, the US military is conducting a drill in Chicago. The Windy City's Office of Emergency Management and Communications told the Chicago Tribune on Tuesday it is providing support for routine military training exercises, including flying helicopters in the downtown area of the city at night. The training sites have been carefully selected to minimise the impact on the daily routine of residents, the OEMC said in a statement released to the public. World Date states at least they have an army to exercise, unlike the UK. Reprehensible UNESCO adds works of Che Guevara to World Register. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation, UNESCO, announced that it has included the life and works of Ernesto Che Guevara in this year's additions to the Memory of the World Register. US Rep Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, RFL, chairman of the Middle East and North Africa Subcommittee, blasted the reprehensible decision Monday, saying the organisation is making a mockery of its own ideals. This decision is more than an insult to the families of those Cubans who were lined up and summarily executed by Che and his merciless cronies, but it also serves as a direct contradiction to the UNESCO ideals of encouraging peace and universal respect for human rights, she said in a statement. The collection added to register is comprehensive, including 431 manuscripts and 567 written documents from Guevara's adolescent motorcycle diary days to his campaign in Bolivia, where he was executed in 1967. According to its website, items included in the Memory of the World Register are endorsed by UNESCO's Director General and are selected based on world significance and outstanding universal value. The collection is now recognised as a World Heritage and will be protected under the United Nations. A World Date writer comments, I wonder if they would do the same for Stalin and Pol Pot, those 2 great exponents of communism and killers of their own kind. Thought for the day, what happens in the US happens here. I know that some of my listeners will say, what the hell is she whinging over America for? We live in the UK, and yes, you would have a point. But you will have missed an even bigger one. The US was in reality the first European-based civilization in the New World, with most if not all of its earlier immigrants being from Europe. And I'm discounting black slavery and the ever-moving Chinese immigrants here, but like us, they were at one time, and millions still are, people like you and me, of our tribe or one of our tribes. Despite political affiliations and a slight language barrier, white Americans are you and I, just in another country. So whether we like it or not, what happens over there, and I'm not talking just the weather, is more than likely to occur in one disguise or another over here. And when I read from the article by Frosty Woolridge, I'm directly referring to our large cities that were based on car manufacturing, steel or ships or whatever, and then perhaps you can see why we should not ignore what America goes through, because if you listen very carefully, it is already in parts of our once great country, and it is all a plan, my friends, all a global game plan. And I quote, Detroit by Frosty Woolridge. For 15 years, from the mid-1970s to 1990, I worked in Detroit, Michigan. I watched it descend into the abyss of crime, debauchery, gunplay, drugs, school truancy, carjacking, gangs and human depravity. I watched entire city blocks burnt out. I watched graffiti explode on buildings, cars, trucks, buses and schoolyards, trash everywhere. Detroiters walked through it, tossed more into it and ignored it. Tens of thousands and then hundreds of thousands today exist on federal welfare, free housing and food stamps. With aid to dependent children, minority women birthed 8 to 10 and in one case one woman birthed 24 children as reported by the Detroit Free Press, all on American taxpayer dollars. A new child meant a new car payment, a new TV and whatever mum wanted. I saw Lyndon Baines Johnson's Great Society flourish in Detroit. If you give money for doing nothing, you'll get more hands out taking money for doing nothing. Mayor Coleman Young, perhaps the most corrupt mayor in America outside of Richard Daley in Chicago, rode Detroit down to its knees. He set the benchmark for cronyism, incompetence and arrogance. As a black man, he said, "I am an MFIC. The IC meant in charge. You can figure out the rest. But in case you're too nice, this presenter states MF stands for motherfucker." Detroit became a majority black city with 67% African Americans. As a United Van Lines truck driver for my summer job from teaching math and science, I loaded hundreds of American families into my van for a new life in another city or state. Detroit plummeted from 1.8 million citizens to 912,000 today. At the same time, legal and illegal immigrants converged on the city for the free government handouts, so much so that Muslims number over 300,000. Mexicans number 400,000 throughout Michigan, but most work in Detroit. As the whites moved out, the Muslims moved in. As the crimes became more violent, the whites fled. Finally, unlawful Mexicans moved in at a torrid pace. Detroit suffers so much shoplifting that grocery stores no longer operate in many inner city locations. You could cut the racial tension in the air with a knife. Detroit may be one of our best examples of multiculturalism, pure dislike and total separation from America. Today you hear Muslim calls to worship over the city like a new American Baghdad, with hundreds of Islamic mosques in Michigan paid for by Saudi Arabian oil money. High school flunk-out rates reached 76% last June, according to NBC's Brian Williams. Classrooms resemble more foreign countries than America. English? Few speak it. The city features a 50% illiteracy rate and it's growing. Unemployment hit 28.9% in 2009 as the auto industry vacated the city. In Time magazine on October 4th, 2009, The Tragedy of Detroit, How a Great City Fell and How It Can Rise Again, I choked on the writer's description of what happened. If Detroit had been ravaged by a hurricane, submerged by a ravenous flood, we'd know a lot more about it, said Daniel Ockrent. If drought and carelessness had spread bushfires across the city, we'd see it on the evening news every night. Earthquakes, tornadoes, you name it. If natural disaster had devastated the city that was once the living proof of American prosperity, the rest of the country might take notice. But Detroit, once our fourth largest city, now 11th and slipping rapidly, has had no such luck. Its disaster has long been a slow unwinding that seemed to remove it from the rest of the country. Even the death rattle that in the past year emanated from its signature industry brought more attention to the auto executives than to the people of their city, who had for so long been victimised by their dreadful decision making. As Coleman Young's corruption brought the city to its knees, no amount of federal dollars could save the incredible payoffs, kickbacks and illegality permeating his administration. I witnessed the city's death from the seat of my 18-wheeler tractor trailer because I moved people out of every sector of decaying Detroit. By any quantifiable standard, the city is on life support. Detroit's treasury is $300 million short of the funds needed to provide the barest municipal services, Ockrent said. The school system, which 6 years ago was compelled by the teachers' union to reject a philanthropist's offer of $200 million to build 15 small independent charter high schools, is in receivership. The murder rate is soaring and 7 out of 10 remain unsolved. 3 years after Katrina devastated New Orleans, unemployment in that city hit a peak of 11%. In Detroit today, the unemployment rate is 28.9%. That's worth spelling out, 28.9%. At the end of O'Krent's report, and he will write a dozen more about Detroit, he said, "That's because the story of Detroit is not simply one of a great city's collapse, it's also about the erosion of the industries that helped build the country we know today. The ultimate fate of Detroit will reveal much about the character of America in the 21st century. If what was once the most prosperous manufacturing city in the nation has been brought to its knees, what does that say about our recent past? And if it can't find a way to get up, what does that say about America's future?" As you read in my book review of Chris Steiner's book, $20 per gallon, the auto industry won't come back. Immigration will keep pouring more and more uneducated third world immigrants from the Middle East into Detroit, thus creating a beachhead for Islamic hegemony in America. If 50% illiteracy continues, we will see more homegrown terrorists spawned out of the Muslim ghettos of Detroit. Illiteracy plus Islam equals walking human bombs. You've already seen it in Madrid, Spain, London, England and Paris, France with train bombings, subway bombings and riots. As their numbers grow, so will their power to enact their barbaric Sharia law that negates republican forms of government, First Amendment rights and subjugates women to the lowest rungs on the human ladder. We will see more honour killings by upset fathers and brothers that demand subjugation by their daughters, sisters and wives. Muslims prefer beheading of women to scare the hell out of any other members of their sect from straying. Multiculturalism, what a perfect method to kill our language, culture, country and way of life. I pray everyone who reads this realises that if we don't stand up and scream at Washington and our state, city and local leaders, that is what awaits the rest of America. If you think Mexicans and Muslims and other foreigners will eventually fit right in, then you're as big a part of the problem as they are. If you think this is just a bunch of hooey and you feel no duty to fight for this country, then I'm sorry, I don't know what it will take for you to stand and fight. If you love America, please pass this along. And this is what I'm doing. To the only people who stand a chance of understanding what is happening all over the Western world. Colonisation which hides under stats, political gains, religion, hypocrisy and lies. No laws will be brought in to safeguard us white Europeans or early non-Islamic migrants at all. None. In fact, it is open season to all, a virtual slave trading of countries and cultures, ours. Islam means submission and slavery in whatever form you care to think. Which is why I highlighted the article from Frosty on Detroit. We all need to start to recognise the enemy within and still arriving on our shores. Think of the prodigal son being welcomed back, but pissed off his nice brother. We Brits may not be the perfect parents, grandparents or even nationalists, but we do owe our descendants a future, even if they don't appreciate it or are too busy living the multicultural Marxist lie. We have to fight for them, because by the time the establishment has slipped up big time and realised the viper nursed at their breast is not a nice snakey at all, it'll be too late for us as a nation, and Detroit will not be alone. It is from non-deportations, expensive and futile trials, non-reporting or prosecutions of large-scale rapes of our children, huge financial frauds perpetrated on the poor people of the UK, blind eye turning away from the Muslim communities and their problems with an existing non-Muslim population, plus non-stop massive immigration of Muslims, that a diaspora of Islam is growing rapidly from these little seeds, vast, rich, and with the dispensation of accommodating manure from our media and governing bodies, doing very well on the dung heap, thank you Britannia. My message for this weekend is, think very carefully before you dismiss our cousins across the pond, and I mean the ordinary people in the US, as they are going through exactly what we are, and their politicians don't listen either. We Europeans are all in the same boat, and we all need to pull together to rid our lands of the parasitical oil slick bubbling in our midst. That is of course Mozart speak, and I don't spare the rhetoric, but for another phrasing much cleverer and understated than mine, listen to Norman Tebbit, a man who has my complete and undying respect. In an interview on BBC he carefully phrased the exact wording we as a party and a people need to use. Our South East Press Liaison Officer sent this in. I listened to the interview this morning with Tebbit. At the end he was asked to comment on the issues for which he was anxious for our country. He spoke of 3 issues including Europe and welfare abuse. However, first on his list came his anxiety over the consequences of the uncontrolled, unlimited and uncounted immigration of the Labour years, which, he said, had been more than the country can absorb, and has led to the fracturing of our society. He's very worried about these fractures that now exist in our country. Excellent words from him, put very neatly and calmly. This interview is on the BBC website and will be repeated later this evening on the BBC channel. So there you have it, in my words and Mr Tebbett's, the same thing but differently put. But it tackles the same problem all we Europeans have, that of a foreign cultural and religious invasion happening now. And finally, a step in the wrong direction, or is this the unkindest cut of all? A man with 63-kilogram testicles is unhappy after their removal, as the operation left him with a tiny penis. Wesley Warren Jr. had a 13-hour procedure to remove his swollen sac after it grew so huge he had to wear a hoodie top as trousers to support the load. The 49-year-old couldn't have sex and suffered from crippling pain from carrying around the testicles, which weighed more than a baby hippo, the Sun reports. But now the American fears he'll never be able to have a relationship with a woman after surgery left his manhood measuring just 2.5 centimetres long. Wesley said, "I know the majority of people are probably expecting me to express extreme happiness and glee that my life has been transformed since the sac has been removed, but it's not as simple as that. I do feel a great sense of comfort that the weight is no longer between my legs. It got to the point that it was a danger to my health. But when I look down at what's there now, it's not the same as what it was. It's totally different. My natural look prior to the growth is not what came out of surgery. What came out of surgery is a nub an inch long and it doesn't get any larger." This presenter says, apart from the fact he hasn't seen his penis for years and doesn't know what it looked like, he should go back and ask them for a penis enlargement, because his human rights have been affected. How did he get huge bollocks anyway? It just ain't normal, is it? Mind you, it could all just be a load of bollocks, couldn't it? You'll have to excuse me. You've been listening to The World at 8. I'm Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy, safe and cool weekend.